a federal judge to pause their appeal of the federal documents case. At one time, legal experts considered this to be the strongest of the 4 cases against the president-elect. The evidence, boxes of top-secret documents that Trump wasn't supposed to have, seized by the FBI from his Florida home. But in July, the Trump-appointed judge overseeing the case threw it out. And as national correspondent Benji Heyer reports, it won't be long before the others disappear as well.
Donald Trump is alleged to have tried to overturn the results of the 2020 election, but with him set to return to the White House, having won the 2024 election, the prosecution over those efforts 4 years ago is now winding up. Jack Smith, appointed to oversee the investigation, is finishing his work sooner than intended in order to get ahead of Trump's promise to fire him within seconds of being sworn in. It means Smith would leave without his cases actually seeing trial, both this one, dealing with election interference, and Trump's alleged mishandling of classified documents, which was dismissed by a Trump-appointed judge in Florida this summer, though that decision remains on appeal. Now, traditionally, special counsels issue a final report when their investigations conclude. It is not clear if this one will see the light of day. Meanwhile, Donald Trump's hush money sentencing is likely to be delayed further or scrapped entirely as the judge in New York considers whether the Supreme Court's ruling on presidential immunity means the conviction should be dropped. And frankly, regardless of what happens in court, public opinion has suggested the president-elect's criminal behaviour is not deemed a barrier to him taking office again. It sets a remarkable precedent going forward, and it also opens up a world of questions over what happens next, not just to Donald Trump, but others connected to those attempts to subvert democracy, culminating in the January 6th attack on the US Capitol. What about the hundreds of people convicted over their involvement in the riot, many of whom were jailed? Will outstanding defendants have their cases paused, or, as he's pledged, will Donald Trump pardon some of them? And when he becomes president, will Trump weaponize the Department of Justice to pursue who he calls the enemies within, in reference to his political opponents who've tried to hold him to account or lock him up? It is worth stressing, Donald Trump, throughout his campaign, has maintained his innocence, labeling his prosecution as political persecution. Benji Heyer, Scripps News, Washington.
Joining me now to talk more about this is Neama Rahmani, a former federal prosecutor. Thanks so much for being here. We have just learned one of the outstanding legal cases against Trump has been dropped. What impact does the resignation of Jack Smith have on the other one?
Jack Smith sees the writing on the wall. A sitting president can't be prosecuted, so it's not a matter of if, but when the cases will be dismissed, both the D.C. election fraud case and the Florida classified documents case. Of course, the Florida case was already dismissed, but is up on appeal. But Jack Smith needs to begin the process of winding these cases down. Otherwise, Trump's lawyers will file a motion to dismiss. And if not, he'll direct his new attorney general, whether it's Matt Gaetz or someone else, to fire Smith as soon as Trump takes office. So it's just a matter of time. So I think Smith is doing the right thing by dismissing the cases now, tendering his resignation, and moving on with his professional life.
There is talk of his final report from Jack Smith before he leaves his post. What could we learn from this report?
I don't think we're going to learn a whole lot more than what's already been made public. Obviously, the election fraud case, a lot of that evidence came out in the January 6th committee, and both the first and the superseding indictment. And at the end of the day, Trump wins because he wins politically. He didn't really win on the merits necessarily. It's not like the case reached a resolution. So I don't know what Jack Smith's report is going to contain more than what's been made public, because it's longstanding Department of Justice guidance that once someone is president, they're not subject to prosecution. So that's going to be the extent of this report. I wouldn't expect to see a whole lot more than that.
Is this a report that will be made public, or does that depend on Merrick Garland?
It does depend on Merrick Garland. He should review the report and make it public entirely, or redact parts that, for some confidentiality or national security reasons, should be redacted. But ultimately, I don't know if there's enough time to get this report done. I expect it to be bare bones at best, because, again, there's not a resolution of the investigation or a case that you would typically see when there's a special counsel involved. So, for instance, in the Hunter Biden case, I would expect that report to be complete, but not in Jack Smith's case.
Interesting. What consequences, if any, could there be for Trump based on information contained in this report, whether it's made public or not?
There really are no consequences because the cases have to be dismissed. And by the time Trump leaves office 4 years from now, the statute of limitations will have long since run. It's not like these cases can be put on hold for 4 years. Trump, like any other criminal defendant, has a right to a speedy trial. So the timing of all this, which is partially Jack Smith's fault, he waited some time to file these cases and he didn't anticipate, like he should have, that Trump would delay, use procedural tactics, law and motion, and appeals to delay the case. And I don't think he anticipated the possibility that he would be reelected. So Trump's lawyers did a masterful job delaying. And when he takes office, this is all going to be behind him. There's no real possibility of Trump being charged again 4 years from now.
Okay, let's talk about the consequences, though. There could be perhaps for Jack Smith that are handed down by the Trump administration, depending on what's in that report. Is there a way for any sort of punishment or consequences for Jack Smith?
Well, with the new attorney general, someone who may be very loyal to Donald Trump, again, might be Matt Gaetz if he's confirmed or someone else, you may see some sort of retaliatory prosecution. I don't necessarily know what that would be. I think many career prosecutors would resist orders from their attorney general to prosecute someone. I know a lot of American people think that Donald Trump was treated unfairly and the Department of Justice's prosecutions were unfair, but there's no real legal mechanism to go after Jack Smith in any way that makes sense. And hopefully the judiciary would stop any type of prosecution of a former Department of Justice official who's appointed pursuant to the special counsel law and is just doing his job.
Neama, you mentioned Matt Gaetz. The pick now widely being seen as a controversial pick for Attorney General. What's your reaction to it?
My first reaction as a former federal prosecutor is this a joke? Here's someone who has absolutely no prosecution experience whatsoever. And if you're rewarding loyalty, I understand the appointment, but this is the nation's top prosecutor. You need someone that has some prosecution experience, some criminal law experience at least. And I'm setting aside all the allegations and accusations of sex trafficking and his DUI arrest. Gaetz may well be guilty or innocent. I'm just basing this purely on experience alone, and he has absolutely none. And there's no basis for someone who's never tried a criminal case to lead the Department of Justice. Just doesn't make any sense to me as a former federal prosecutor.
Yeah, it's a put me in coach moment, I think, for you. Neama Rahmani, thanks so much, former federal prosecutor. I appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me, Karen.